So a convicted murderer is claiming that they've been misgendered in prison by another inmate. It's easy to dismiss this story, so we will. No, it's easy to dismiss this story, but it does raise the question, why are trans women in women's prisons? To start with, we could go with that one, couldn't we? Well, I'm joined now by co-director of For Women Scotland, Susan Smith. Thank you very much for joining me. Can you give us a bit of background on this story? The headline looks a bit silly.
Well, it does look a bit silly, but it's quite serious, not least for the poor woman who's been accused of transphobic harassment and abuse of this prisoner. So the prisoner in question is goes by the name of Alex Stewart. He was originally called Alan Baker. And he murdered another man, a father with two children, and he was sentenced to life with a minimum tariff of 19 years. He almost immediately, when he went into prison, started claiming that he identified as a woman. And he's been in quite a lot of headlines, actually. If you Google his name, he'll come up. He was in a relationship with another trans-identified prisoner at one point, and that caused a lot of trauma and distress for some of the women in the prison because they were rolling around on the floor together. And then they were separated, and he entered the Miss Prison Fitness competition and won, obviously, because he's a man. And there's been lots of reports over the years coming out from women in prison that he's intimidating presence and they feel scared of him. But now he has claimed that this other prisoner, this woman called Janie Southey, had been making comments about him, calling him a tranny and using he, him pronouns. And I think on one occasion he says that she commented when they were having a karaoke that he should choose to sing Man, I Feel Like a Woman, which is sort of entertaining. You know, that's the kind of thing people might just say to somebody who is like that. But he's decided that this is part of his harassment charge, and it's gone to court, and he is now in a relationship with another murderer, Naomi Fee, who murdered her 2-year-old stepson, which was a very notorious case in Scotland. So she has also been appearing in court as a witness.
See, this might be surprising to some people who, especially when you think this week, we've had lots of newspapers talking about how rough prison can be, the various cruelties and punishments that other prisoners might want to do to you. We won't go into the details here because it's not about this story, but we all know what we're talking about. And then we get a story of someone has made a joke about a karaoke song you might sing, and then that now is this court case. How does that happen?
Do you know, I am not sure exactly, obviously, what's going on, and it's a live case, but there does seem to be a suggestion that now we're becoming more aware of these men in women's prisons and what a problem it is. And obviously in Scotland, we had the notorious case of Isla or Adam Bryson, who was the double rapist who was put in a women's prison for a time. And it has focused some attention on these other murderers who are still in the women's estate. And I do wonder whether this is a way to present as a victim and claim vulnerability. I suppose that might play into it. But, you know, this is someone who emerged in evidence on Monday that he's had no sort of surgery or interventions or anything like that. But he was allowed out of prison to have a tracheal shave, so have his Adam's apple reduced. And that was reported today in the Daily Record. And we're trying to figure out, you know, who paid for this, where he went, the fact that prison guards would have had to have gone with him to the hospital. And so he's getting this unnecessary cosmetic surgery at an expense to the taxpayer for something that is probably the least invasive surgery you could get, but maybe as a way to prove that he's genuinely transgender. And the whole thing just seems almost beyond belief.
OK, now I should probably say that they're not here to defend themselves, but they're in prison, so that makes some sense, I suppose. But do you get any sense of... Because this argument, we often talk about this on this show and other shows on this station, that if you are genuinely someone who believes so passionately about trans rights, you should also hate these stories.
Yeah, I think so, because when you look at the number of transgender prisoners that there are and what they've done, there's a disproportionate representation of really violent offenders who are identifying as trans. So there are two possible explanations for that. One is that trans prisoners or transgender people offend at a higher rate and in the most serious crime bracket than the general population, male and female. Or violent, manipulative men are going to use something like this as a means to get what they perceive as better treatment in prison, and that they are really taking the piss. And that, sorry, probably shouldn't say that.
I have to apologise like I did about Lewis, but we'll do that at the end. It's all right, carry on.
That they're that they are really mocking the system, and that a lot of them we know come out and they go back to just being identifying as men again. So it's a cynical ploy, and it underlines how dangerous any sort of policy based on self-ID really can be.
Any sense that there's a movement to try and look at these loopholes?
No, unfortunately, not in Scotland. There were measures brought in England and Wales. They've been a bit tougher on trying to reform this. In Scotland, we'd had this long-awaited review. They kept promising they were going to examine this, and then when it came out quite recently, it actually changes very little. So they will claim that they have done a review, but what they decided was that they would not put anyone who was accused of a violent crime against women in the female estate, any male person. But the problem with that is that you have no way of knowing with some of these people whether they have committed violent crimes against women, because we know that there's a lot of crimes like rape and domestic violence that often go unpunished. And when you have people who are capable and have committed really brutal murders, or in another case, there's been child sex offenders placed in women's prisons. So we know that these are not people who are non-violent individuals, and this idea that they will be restrained by some innate sense of chivalry from assaulting the women in prison is absolutely ludicrous.
Susan, thank you very much for that. That's Susan Smith, who's the co-director of For Women Scotland. Thank you for joining us.